Hey friends, SGT here with a very special friend back joining us again. It's James Wesley Rawles, the founder of survivalblog.com. Mr. Rawles, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, James, just to refresh the audience's memory, you've got great books. I know Patriots was the first one, Survivors, then Founders. And even though I know you've stressed to me that's not why you wanted to come on, you want to come on the show just to, help people get prepared and to help them understand the importance of preparing. Just give us a refresher on your books so people know, because these are great books.
Sure. The latest one that just came out the 25th of September was Founders, and that's another novel of the coming collapse. It's in the Patriots series. It's set in the exact same time period as Patriots and Survivors, and it's just set in different geography. It's primarily set in the Kentucky and Tennessee area, and then there's a couple of major subplots where it details the cross-country journey of Ken and Terry Layton leaving Chicago, which is just briefly described in Patriots. And there's also a new character introduced. His name is Joshua Watanabe. He's an Air Force maintenance NCO at Malmstrom Air Force Base up in Montana. So that's the latest novel. It just came out in hardback. It hit number 4 on Amazon and number 11 on the New York Times bestseller list. Of course, my other two novels are Survivors, which came out a year ago, and Patriots, which has been out for many years. Patriots is about to come out in hardback for the first time ever. That'll be in November. And in addition to that, I'm the author of a nonfiction book called How to Survive the End of the World as We Know It, and that's published by Penguin. It's still one of their bestsellers. And, of course, I do a daily blog called Survival Blog, and I highly recommend that even for your listeners that don't enjoy fiction, they at least delve into the archives of Survival Blog. Everything there is free and fully searchable.
We did a gripping interview a few months back, so thanks again for giving us your time now. Let's talk a little bit about the economic situation we see in the United States, in Europe. Things really seem to be deteriorating. We've been talking about it for a long time. Do you see any signs that things are going to get better, or is the collapse pretty much at hand?
Well, the collapse may be at hand. We're seeing things fall apart generally, particularly in Greece, Italy, and Spain. But even France is starting to show some cracks in their veneer. I believe that the trouble that we're seeing in Europe very well could turn into another global credit crisis that would make the 2008 crisis look small by comparison. And there's a good chance that within the next 2 or 3 years, there could be a collapse in confidence of the U.S. dollar. Now, in the short term, the dollar is actually benefiting from all the trouble in Europe because the dollar is seen as a relative safe haven. So there's actually an inflow of investments into dollar-denominated investments. And I think that will probably continue for the next 6 to 12 months. But at some point, our foreign creditors are going to start demanding a higher rate of return on the U.S. dollar based upon our government's gross overspending. They give drunken sailors a bad name in terms of the amount of money they've been able to spend, the money they've created out of thin air. The current round of monetization that they euphemistically call quantitative easing is essentially unlimited. It's QE to infinity, and that is frightening because it's going to be wildly inflationary. And again, at some point, our foreign creditors are going to say enough is enough. We don't want 2 or 3% on U.S. Treasury paper. We want 15 or 20% rate of return on U.S. Treasury paper. And at that point, a couple of things are going to happen. We'll see it almost impossible for the government to finance itself because the cost of money is going to just go through the roof. And the pace at which they monetize is going to have to increase because there isn't a tax base that's sufficient to support the government spending. And just the interest payments alone are now close to a third of government spending. If the interest rates spike, the amount we pay every year in interest is going to be more than half of the budget, or perhaps even 2/3 of the budget. When that happens, they're going to have to monetize even more heavily. And then what we have is a snowballing effect where there's even less confidence in the U.S. dollar and Treasury paper and demands for even higher rates of return. and we'll have a repeat of the Weimar Germany experience with hyperinflation.
Yeah, and that's what I'm afraid of. James Turk, John Williams, a lot of the folks that we count as friends here at SGT Report are saying the same thing, that hyperinflation will become a reality. And this latest QE to infinity certainly seems to put the final nail in the coffin. Let me ask you this: do you see either presidential candidate being able to turn this thing around at all,
No.
whether it's Romney or Obama?
No. I don't think that. Even if Ron Paul were elected president, I don't think he could stop it from happening.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I would love to see him elected, but regardless of who sits in the White House, we still have a mathematically insoluble equation, and that is that we have now borrowed so much money that it's mathematically impossible for us to pay it back. It cannot happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I guess I wanted to ask that really for new listeners, because I think there's still some folks stuck in the false right-left paradigm that believe that maybe if Mitt Romney becomes president, he'll turn this thing around, where I think that's
all
probably...
he's going to do is,
go ahead.
He's just going to slow down, perhaps, a onrushing train. I don't think he's going to stop anything.
Yeah, maybe one of the blessings of Ron Paul being really mistreated and maligned and criminally, shut down really at the GOP convention in Tampa is that this won't all collapse on his watch. I mean, if there's a mixed blessing,
he won't be the next Herbert Hoover.
Right. No, you're right. But you said not long ago that, and it's really a bright spot. It was in an interview you did with Alex Jones, in which you said there is only one logical conclusion, one inevitable conclusion, and that is that our constitutional republic will be restored. Do you still feel that way?
I do. I have a lot of faith in our Constitution and in the bedrock culture of our country, and I think it will prevail in the long term. In the short term, we're in for a lot of pain, and unwinding all this debt is going to be a very painful process. We're going to see austerity measures that make the current austerity in Greece that's causing all the riots. Our austerity measures are going to have to be even worse. We have a huge national debt, and instead of being a net lender nation, we're now a net debtor nation. And you don't really dig out from underneath that very well. I mean, the last nation that saw that sea change on a grand scale was Spain in the 1500s. And after that happened, Spain became a third-rate country for the next 4 centuries. And that, unfortunately, is where we're headed. We owe so much to so many, and we have so little with which to repay because we no longer have an industrial base in this nation. All we have is the opportunity to borrow more money, which, if you're a dad and you have teenagers and you look at their spending and you want to chastise them, you don't hand them more money. I think that's the situation we're in as a nation.
Let me ask you about Spain, since you brought up Spain. We're seeing so many interesting things happen in Spain as the people stand up, and the people are now correctly identifying really the enemies of humanity, and it's this debt-based fiat banking system. And the only thing standing between the people and regaining liberty in Spain and here in this country is the thin blue line, right, which is the police and police forces, which right now seem entrenched in supporting this broken system. Whether they know it or not, they're supporting the banksters by beating down protesters in Spain, by beating down protesters at Occupy, by beating down protesters in Greece. And what we need to happen is we need to see, oath keepers stand up in this country and stand with the people and against the banksters. What is your feeling on what you're seeing in Spain? I'm seeing humanity rising, which I think is awfully inspirational.
Well, it is inspirational in some ways, but it's also more or less a sign of desperation on the part of people. They, especially in Greece and to a lesser extent in Spain, people are so desperately poor that they can't afford medication, they can't afford food for their families. there have been massive layoffs where to the point where 1/3 of the businesses in Greece that existed 3 years ago no longer exist. They're just gone, shuttered. You go down streets in Athens and other cities in Greece, and it's just storefront after storefront after storefront where the windows are painted over or boarded up. That's the kind of situation that we're going to face here in the United States. And if you want a preview of what it could look like, read the book Atlas Shrugged, because that's what we're going to see. I think that people need to take heart in the political process, and they need to take part in the political process, because that is going to be, if anything's going to save us, it's going to be politically. We're not going to see any good result that comes out of total collapse, and we're not going to see any good result that comes out of the imposition of martial law. Either of those are dead ends. I'm hopeful that the democratic process in this republic will prevail, and that constitutional government will be restored. Between now and then, though, I think we're going to see some very painful times, and I'm hopeful that the right people will stand up. And as I pointed out in many of my writings, it's only the people who are well prepared, who are not worried about where they're going to find their next meal, who are going to have their head up above the crowd, looking around and seeing the big picture, and being ready and able to stand up and make the tough calls and to fully engage in the political process. Everyone else is going to be worried about protecting their families, feeding their families, and just staying alive. It's only going to be a handful of people, just like in the Revolutionary War, that are going to have their eye on the big picture and that are going to have the gumption to do something about it.
Well, James, before we talk about survival and prep and how people can prepare for a worst-case scenario, let's just talk about all of the blatant criminality we're seeing in our own government, in our own financial system. We're seeing securities fraud. We're seeing financial crimes go unpunished, whether it's MF Global with John Corzine or J.P. Morgan's crimes or Bank of America or Wells Fargo or the drug money laundering from these other international banks, including the ones I just mentioned. It's just evident to all now. Anybody paying attention can see what's going on here, that the system is beyond repair. And in that same interview with Alex Jones, you said we're entering into an age of deception and betrayal by our own government. Don't you think at this point, one of the things really in our camp, one of the things that is hopeful is that everybody can see it now? I mean, anybody with a pulse paying attention can see it.
Well, it's much more blatant now than it ever has been. But unfortunately, not everyone is plugged into the alternative media. Now, the mass media is very rapidly losing its grip, and I think it's one of the reasons that we're likely to see a clampdown on the Internet and alternative media in the next year or two, because the powers that be are pretty desperate at this point. They recognize that their intended message is not being well received, and that a lot of people are paying more attention to the truth.
Well, thanks for watching Part 1. Don't miss Part 2. People have no clue what the collapse of Western civilization might look like. James says it's time to get your beans, bullets, and Band-Aids. Click here.